Welcome back. Today's topic is going to be wrist pain while using kettlebells. I am Emma and I am your kettlebell coach here to teach you about all things kettlebells. So if you're new to my page, check out all the other resources I have, and I hope that this video is helpful about understanding why we have wrist pain while using kettlebells. Now, this is a really common issue that my clients and people reach out to me online about all the time, saying, what am I doing wrong? My wrists kill while I'm using kettlebells. Sometimes it hurts and sometimes they straight up have bruising. And I'm here to tell you, it's probably because you're doing something wrong. Now, there is definitely a little bit of a learning curve or an adjustment period when you first start holding kettlebells in this position right here. It's called a front rack. There definitely is an adjustment period where you're going to have to get used to bearing weight on an otherwise very sensitive and untouched part of your body. Aside from maybe a watch, nothing ever touches there. But it shouldn't be bruising. You're not just going to bruise until you don't bruise anymore. So what is going on? First of all, it is probably an issue with how you're holding your wrists. So first things first, there are no wrists in kettlebell training. That means you want to imagine your wrist is in a wrist guard, like you have sprained your wrist or you're going rollerblading and that wrist cannot move. And whether or not you know that, once you're in the moment moving with your kettlebell, we tend to forget it. So the very first thing you need to do is say, are my wrists straight while I'm holding the kettlebell? So when you clean that kettlebell, you want to make sure that you clean it up and you keep a nice straight wrist. This would be the first opportunity you have for a bent wrist. Bent meaning bent back here. Because when we bend that wrist back, the weight is now pressing even more into our forearms. My hand is not supporting it at all. And now that whole 25 pounds is grinding into the back of my forearm. Whereas if I keep a nice straight wrist, which you can see here, my grip is squeezing the bell, my hand's squeezing this bell, and I'm actually supporting it with my hand. And also all of the muscles on the back of the wrist are now flexed, providing a bit of a barrier to your flesh that could easily get bruised. So when you clean the bell, if you are not careful, what can happen is you can clean that bell and you've done this. Clunk for a variety of reasons. The kettlebell has clunked, but specifically your wrist was bent. And if you're having a hard time with the kettlebell clean, please check out the video linked right up here. It explains everything you need to know about the clean. But today we're focusing on whether or not that wrist was straight when you cleaned the bell. So again, here I'm going to show on the other side because it hurts to do it wrong, so you get tired really quickly. I got to switch sides. If I clean that bell and I have a limp wrist and it flips back, this is going to start bruising and hurting my wrist. What it wants to look like is this. I'm squeezing the bell, I'm supporting it. It is not that uncomfortable. I say that uncomfortable because of course 25 pounds of iron pressing into your forearm is not going to be pleasant, but exercise isn't pleasant. Shouldn't hurt, but it's not going to be pleasant. So that's your first checkpoint. When I'm picking the bell up, are my wrists straight? And the way you can tell is by videotaping yourself. If you are watching this video, maybe you don't have a kettlebell coach of your own. I am available. Check out my website if you want to learn about my services. But if you don't have a coach, you're going to want to take a video of yourself to see what you're doing, because even if you know that wrist should be straight, you might realize that you're not executing it. And the way you learn how to have a straight wrist is just reminding yourself over and over and over again, watching yourself, looking at the videos, looking in the mirror, and observing what your body is doing. Eventually that mind-muscle connection will click, and you will just naturally, without thinking about it, keep a nice straight wrist. Next, when you're moving with the bell, is your wrist staying straight? So one of the main issues I see is when people are holding the weight overhead, specifically going into an exercise where they're moving under the weight, like maybe a windmill or a Turkish get-up, that wrist bends. So here you'll see, I clean the weight up, press it up overhead, and I have a nice long straight wrist. Hopefully you can see it, I'm moving back. You see here, my arm is steady, that weight's sitting nice and behind me. And because it's sitting behind me, I want to make sure I am gripping it so it doesn't pull me all the way back. So here, if I let my wrist start to bend, I get that weak, loose, slack wrist. That weight is now pressing with all of its force into my arm. My hand is not supporting it at all anymore. And that is going to lead to the bruising, and it's also going to lead to a really sore inner wrist. So you might, be going about your reps and you have a straight wrist. And then all of a sudden, it starts to go. You're getting tired and you're leading with the inside of the wrist and the palm as you try to get that weight up, and it's pressing into the back of the arm, ultimately leading to that bruising. So you've really got to be conscientious about what your arm and the bell is doing. And I don't know if you can see it there, but the imprint of the emblem of the kettlebell is in the back of my wrist because I was holding it incorrectly. Sometimes that happens even if you're holding it correctly, but generally speaking, that short period of time, it shouldn't have happened. So record yourself and see what is happening. Are your wrists straight or are they not? Because just because you think they're straight doesn't mean they are. So the other thing to be mindful of is that the bell is actually positioned in a comfortable place, because sometimes these bells have one side that's round, one side that's flat or something. I think that there's companies that sell kettlebells that look like characters. They're very bumpy. So you kind of got to make sure that you have it nestled into the most comfortable place. So once you've cleaned up that bell, you might feel like, ooh, that's like a little far forward and really digging into the bone on the outer side of my wrist. You can just take it and readjust it. So always readjust it before you press it up. The only exception would be if you're lying on your back for a get up, arm bar, chest press, whatever it is. Once that bell is up over you when you're lying on your back, just take a second and adjust it onto the fleshiest part of your wrist. You just want to make sure we're not like contacting bone directly. Those are the main issues that people have that lead to wrist pain. Slapping the kettlebell and kettlebell cleans when done incorrectly, but that is another video, so check it out. And then also mainly not having straight wrists. And again, you got to record yourself. You've got to take it all in and see if you're doing it correctly. Otherwise, you're not looking, you're not thinking about it. Another tip I have is while you're doing the exercise, watch that weight. Keep an eye on the arm, make sure the wrist is staying really neutral. So, of course, this will get better over time. It's not like if you're bruising now, you'll stop bruising eventually, but some discomfort is normal and you will become more tolerant to that. Like, I really don't feel much pain on the back of my wrists anymore. There's more muscle, more like meat there than there used to be. So obviously it's going to be more comfortable when I hold the bell. If you are really struggling and you find that with practicing an exercise like a clean or the snatch, something ballistic where the kettlebell slapping against your wrist, and as you learn, it's really becoming very difficult to tolerate, I would suggest getting some old school sweatbands, like those terry cloth sweatbands that are, we think of like in the 1980s workout videos, that kind of thing, because they don't support your wrists at all. They just provide a little bit of padding to help take off some of the impact and some of that roughness you feel when the kettlebell slaps. It can be nice to make it a little easier as you're learning the proper form, because you will experience a little bit of slapping of the kettlebell with cleans and snatches as you learn. What I don't want you to do is get gloves or wrist wraps that are meant to support your wrist, whether they're lifting straps or ace bandages, nothing like that. Because if you think about it, think about the wrist straps kind of like a cast. If you've ever had a cast on a body part, when you take off the cast, that area is all shriveled and is lost all of its muscle mass. If you were to always lift with a wrist strap on or do kettlebells with a wrist strap, you would actually prevent yourself from developing any wrist strength, and it would be really painful when you try to do it without. So just make sure that whatever covering you pick is very superficial and loose and not actually providing stability. It's up to you to pick a light enough weight so that way you can work on stabilizing and strengthening those wrists, and then eventually you'll be able to go heavier. So I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. And here is to pain-free kettlebell cleans, snatches, and presses.